Well, good morning to all. Today webinar we will be seeing how to analyze the posting procedure of a OneC document. And we will start with this presentation. So the main objective in this webinar is for you to obtain the skill of tracking down and fixing some typical bugs or defects that occur during the posting procedure of a document. So we will be looking at a live example of one of these defects that has been found on later on past versions of OneC Drive that has been already fixed by the development team, but we'll go inspect them a little bit so we can understand how can we find the cause of this problem and how we can fix such problems. So in this webinar, we will learn how to search the root cause of issues throughout the OneC Drive configuration. So we will be looking at some code. We will be looking at the designer and searching for these problems. We will learn how to use tools for debugging. Some tools that are included in the designer, some other tools that will be made available by the OneC team, and we will get acquainted with the posting procedure structure. So in today's webinar, we're gonna review a task that concerns a bank payment document. So the steps to reproduce this problem will be, we will create a bank payment document. We will fill all the data needed for the document. We will enable the check the paid box and the fee box of this document, and then we will post the document, reviewing the results of the posting procedure. Okay, so now let's head on to our designer, and we will launch our OneC Drive application. Okay, so now that we are in our OneC Drive application, let's go to the cash management subsystem. We will select the bank payments document, and ahead of the presentation, I already created a document for this example, but just to try, let's review this document first. So here we have a bank payment made to a supplier based on a supplier invoice that we have created. So we're using this document to register a bank payment to a supplier based on a purchase that we have made as a company, to our supplier. So we can see we have filled all the document data in the header, the document header. We have checked the paid checkbox and the bank fee checkbox. And we have to notice two things before posting the document. The data, the date in which we are posting this document, this bank payment document, and the date that we are telling our system that this payment was made. So we fill the tabular section of the document with the contract amount of the payment, We have to use the contract of the supplier. And once we post, we need to see what happened after posting this document. To do that, in OneC Drive, we have a tool in the document that is called the flow report. So we go to the command section of the document and we select the flow report button. And we will see how the registers that are used in this document were changed when we posted this document. So we open the flow report, and here we can see all the registers that were involved in the posting of this document. We have accumulation registers, we have information registers, we have accounting registers, and at a simple glance, everything seems normal, perfect. Everything posted correctly. The application didn't give us any warning, any message. But if we pay attention, let's just focus on this cash balance register, accumulation register. We see that we have two record types. One concerning the bank fee and one concerning the bank payment. Now, what is strange about these two records that we have? We have two records showing that we have made a payment to the bank fee at the 29th of August at 12:38 p.m. And we have made the payment to the bank, or the bank payment we have registered to 29th of August, 12 a.m. So there is a discrepancy in the date. Let's remember that we use OneC Drive with the purpose of registering transactions that occur in real life. So these transactions, all the data regarding these transactions should reflect on the document. So if we're registering a bank payment that was made on this day, these two dates here should be the same because we are registering the payment on OneC Drive. This occurs, this only concerns when the date of registry of this bank payment document is the same date as the date of the payment. So that's why in the bank payment document, we have this little section here. So as you know, we can use OneC Drive to register not only transactions that occur in real time, but we can also register transactions that have occurred in the past. So maybe we're just filling up data. So if the date of the document is different from the date we are creating this document, then there won't be no problem. But the problem here is that this document is created the moment we are making the payment. So those dates have to be reflected the same in this document because we register the payment as it comes. So we can see that in all register, these dates differ of the date of the actual document. And from an accounting point of view, we cannot have a payment made the same day having two different timestamps. So this is the problem that has presented, and we are going to see how we can fix it. So before going through the design and and reading the code and taking a look into the configuration, we have to understand as well as to what happens when we post a document. So when we see this register means that the document is already posted. Let's just watch what happens when we just create a document without posting. So let's go back to our bank payments and just create a new bank payment. So we just select a random supplier. Let's set just an amount for 100 euros. And let's save this document. Now, we have created a new document. This document already lives in our info base, and all this data is saved somewhere in our info base. But as you can see in the name of the document, we have a little note saying that this document hasn't been posted yet. And we can check that by going to the flow report, and we see that this document has no registers records whatsoever. Although this document already exists in our info base, it hasn't yet changed any registers in our application. So what does this mean? This means that every time we post a document, we take all the data that is in this document and we write it to our registers. So that's why in already posted document, the flow report will reflect all the changes made to these registers. Okay, so now let's jump into our configuration. Another thing before start, how can we know which document in the configuration we should work? We can click here in the three dots that we have in the right top corner and click the button information for technician. And here you can see the application gives us the exact path to this document that we are working with. So we are working with a document that is called payment expense. We are working with the document. In this case, for the posting procedure, the document form won't be necessary, but we have to understand that we're working with payment expense. So we also understand that bank payment is a synonym or another name that is given to this payment expense document. Another way to finding out which the document we are working with, we can click as well in the right top corner the link icon or the link button. This will open a link and we click show link. We also can see this direction. It shows us that we are working with document payment with reference, and then we can see the reference of this document. It's also useful to know so we can work with this document in the design. Okay, so now let's focus on the designer. Here, as you know, we have the configuration. And in the configuration, we have to work with the metadata that we were using that was pertinent to this document. So we have to look for our payment expense document. We can look through the list of documents of the three, or we can perform a search. So let's just write payment. Payment expense. And here we have our document. Now, as you can see, a document, this metadata object has attributes, tabular sections, and forms. Now, we have to understand where the posting procedure resides in any document. In any document, the posting procedure resides in the object module. As well, we have to understand that the posting procedure also involves the manager module. We have these two modules in every document of one C drive, and not only one C drive, but all one C, all applications based on the one C platform. Okay, so what is the difference between having an object module and a manager module? The difference is this. The object module, as the name says, it works, these procedures work with a created module object we have to specify. So we cannot use these procedures or functions without creating an object. So this works with the specific object. In this case, when we are creating the bank payment or the payment expenses document, the moment that we are creating this object payment expense with his reference that we saw in the link, all these functions and procedures will be available for that object. The manager module works a little bit different. All these functions and procedures will be available to use without the need of creating an object for them to use. So we have to keep that in mind when we are developing something in when we are developing some app in the platform, or when we are changing some or making change to a configuration in the platform. Let's just minimize the manager module because we don't need it right now. And let's focus with the object module. Now, in the object module, we have to find the posting procedure. It's easy to find because it's just called posting. And here we have it, procedure post. Let's just open it and see what we have here. So this posting procedure is about these lines of code that we have in here, and it doesn't look that complicated. Why is that? If you recall, posting procedure has to take data from our document and write it to the registers, accumulation register. Now, because we're working with one C drive, where one C drive is a more robust application, and it's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more complex application. So most of the functions for document posting is made in the common modules of the application, because these are standard procedures that are to be used not only in this payment expense document, but in other documents in one C drive. And as you can see in the tree, we can roughly estimate that we have at least 100 documents in one C drive. So not to write 100 functions for every document on one C drive, the development team just writes these procedures in the common modules. And from the common modules, we call these procedures to each document that we have. So if we need to make a change in any of these procedures, we won't have to make a change on every document that we have, but we just make the change in the common module, and all the change will be available for the document. So this is a way of managing development in OneDrive, and it's a common practice in all development endeavors. Okay, so now that we are here in our posting procedure, let's just have a look of how this posting procedure is divided. We can summarize and say that this posting procedure is divided into three main parts. The first part is initialization data. This means getting all the data that is saved or stored in the document and preparing it for the next step and the next stage of this posting procedure is copying all the data from the document to the register that needs to be involved in this document. And the final step is the control of the data recorded. So after we have taken all the data from the document, we have write it to the register. We have to perform a control check to see if the data that we have written to the register is the right data, is correct, or we don't have any problems with quantities or balances. Okay, so let's remember that we can define the posting procedure of OneDrive documents in 3 steps. So first step is initializing data. The second step is writing that data to our registers. And the third step will be to analyze the data we have just written and check if everything is okay with it. Okay. Now, before starting to debug this piece of code, we have to understand all the development tools that we have available in the designer of the OneC platform. As you know, if we are going to debug this document or this code, we have to use what we call breakpoints. To use breakpoints, we can press F9 and a little red dot will appear in the line that we are on. This shows that when we are debugging, the execution of the code will stop at this line. So we can press F9 to take the breakpoint or put the break. As well, we can right-click on the line and select the breakpoint option. As well, we have the breakpoint icon in our control panel in the top, so we can do that. Okay. Now, let's start with the debugging. In this case, I already know where the problem resides, but let's just launch our application in the debug mode. For that, we go up in the panel and we press to start debugging icon that is a yellow circle with a blue triangle on the center, or we can just press F5 and our application will launch. Okay, so now we are in our application and we are executing the code that is in the configuration. So when we arrive to this point, the execution time will stop at this step. So let's go to our document, our bank payment document. Let's select the document we are working with and let's post it. Now, because we have a breakpoint, the execution of this program has stopped in the line that we have marked. As we understand from the example we made at the beginning, the posting procedure completes without warnings. So we can assume that the problem will be not in the third step, that is control of the data that we have written to the registers, but in the problem will be in the data we're sending to write in the register. Let's state that the second step works with the data gathered from the first step. So generally speaking, there is not much to do in the second step other than adding some new registers that we want to copy the data to. So we can, in this case, we can not go through all these steps because this is simply taking data from the first step, the data that we have gathered from the document, and writing to these documents. So, writing it to these registers. How we can understand which registers are being changed? We can just read the description of these functions that come from our common method. So in this case, we don't need to add or change any registers that are being, the data is being written to. We just have to center on the data that we are sending to our document. Okay, so now we are in this step. Our program is paused, and to see what is happening, we can do step-by-step checking of the code. To do this, we have these icons in the top, in the control panel of the 1C platform. We have the stepping function that we can do pressing F11. We have the step over function that is F10, and we have a step out that is Shift 11. So how does this work? The step out, the step over means that we will jump into the next line of the code. We have to remember that because this line here is calling the documents payment expense initialization document data. That is a function that resides in the manager module. We're opening another function. So we will go through all the steps of that function. If we don't want to do that, we do the step over and we will pass this line to the next one, already executing all the lines that are included in this function or procedure. And the step out function helps us when we are already inside a function and we don't want to go line by line. We just want to go to the next step. We press Shift F1, if F11. So let's go one step in. Let's press F11. And now we will see that the designer has taken us, as I said, to the document payment expense manager module. So we are now reviewing the procedure initialize document data of the manager module. And we can see here that we are just creating one query. We are setting the parameters of this query. Remember, we have to set the reference parameter to know which document we are working with. And all these parameters that will come from the document. If we continue, we just see that we are just setting the default GL accounts, and this is not useful for us. So we're just going to step out of it. Remember, to step out is to execute all these lines of code that we have in this function and go to the next one. So let's step out of this. Now, we are here. We're setting still the parameters of the query in the manager module. And let's see. We're going again to just default language codes, just functions that are used in this manager module. But we can understand that these functions really doesn't do much because it doesn't change the data of the document. So we just step out of it. And let's continue through the code till we get to the query text. Let's skip a little bit of the query and see what is the last step of this function. As you can see, we have a very big query here that maybe will be a little bit scary to look into, but we have tools that will help us understand a little bit of this query without having to read it all. Okay, so after the query, we will execute the query, and then we can see here that we are generating tables, meaning that all the data that are we getting from this query, we are going to put into temporary tables. And these tables are the tables that we will use in the posting procedure to fill these registers here. So we can understand that the data that is being brought by this big query here is the data that we will have a problem with. Because remember, we are getting two different data in our document that we posted. So now, how can we understand what this query is telling us? First of all, it's very large and maybe scary to read it all. But we have a tool in our designer that is called the query wizard. The query wizard gives us just a better structured understanding of what this query is showing. So we can see in the tabs, we have all the queries. Every tab represents a new query. And these queries in the text are separated by these slashes. No? So this means this is the first query. And after these slashes, this is the second query. So if we go back to the query wizard, we can see where are we taking the data from. In this case, we're taking the data from this register, and we're taking these fields of this register. Just at a glance, we can see that none of these fields that we're taking from this register, they don't contain any date reference. So we can assume that the problem is not here. Now we go to the next query, and we see that in this query, we are working with the payment expense stuff. As you remember, the initialization data portion of the posting procedure takes the data from the document and copies it to a temporary table for them to be written into the registers. So it's most likely that our problem will be here. Now, a downside of using the query wizard is that we can structurize or construct our query without having to write any code at all, but we don't understand what the result or what data this query will bring to us. So we don't have any understanding of what this query will bring to us to work with. So to do that, we have a tool. Let's continue with the 1C drive. We have a tool called the query console. This tool is an external data processor that is available for our developers. And with this tool, what we can do is take this query text and copy to this query console so we can see what is the result of this query. We have pasted the query, and let's execute and see what it tells us. Okay, now we are getting some result, but we don't understand what does it mean. It means that the number of resulting records is 1, but we don't see the which data is bringing this query is bringing. Why is that? Because if we read this query, we can see that what this query does is not selecting data, but is putting data into a temporary table. That's why this console is telling us that one record has been put into this temporary table. If we want to see which data was put in this temporary table, we just have to delete or remove the into document table line, because we have to remember that the into keyword just takes the data from the select statement and puts them into a temporary table. So let's delete this one and execute the query again. And we can see that now we have a table of data that is in the document, but still we don't see any data pertinent. Why? Because this query works with parameters. These parameters we can see in the query parameters tab, and we can see that they are empty. So we have to select the reference of the document. And as you remember, we're working with the bank payment, and we just select the bank payment document as reference and execute the query. We have an okay. Now everything is okay. We have selected the reference of this document that we're analyzing in the query parameters section. And now the query console has filled in this reference for us. And now here we can see bank payment, the reference, and all the data that has been sent, that is, this query is sending to our posting procedure. And we can see in the date field, we're getting the wrong date. If we go to our bank payment, we see that the date should be 29th of August, 12:38, 1 second p.m. And we're seeing that this query is giving us that the date is right, but the time is wrong. So we now know that is this part of the query that our problem resides, because we are getting a different date than is in the document. So let's open our query wizard. Let's go to this particular query. And here, we know that this parameter is changed by this clause. Let's open the console query. Let's just analyze a little. So we have a case. So when the paying expense paid is checked and the paying expense payment date is different than this date here, we use the payment date. Means the data, this date refers to the date that is stated here. Because this date doesn't have a timestamp, the platform, what it does, it takes the first hour of the day. That's what in the result, we get 12 a.m. That is the first hour of the day. If this condition is not met, then we use the date, the payment expense date, that this payment expense date is reflected by this parameter. So understanding that, we have to change this condition to also exclude the first date of the day. Here, we don't need to write anything because for the query wizard, we have these functions here. Let's use operators, logical operators. We have an operator. We just can drag and drop to create our query. Now, as well, in this field, we can use all fields pertinent to the payment expenses, and we can take the payment date field and we just drag and drop it to the query. So we don't have to write anything. We just drag and drop till we till we form our query, or in this case, we're adding a condition to this function. Now, we have to use the functions, the date functions. We use the beginning of period function. And here as well, we can just drag and drop. In this case, we have to state that we need a different date than the payment expense, the payment date. And here we use the date keyword because this function uses the beginning of the period of very dates, so we can state the date, the hour, the month. In this case, because we're working with days, we select the date parameter, and that will be it. We just save the changes, and let's see our query. This has changed. And we can see here now in our query, our new condition has been added to the query. So just to show you that we can use the query wizard to construct our query, and we don't even have to write all this. As well, all of these queries had been automatically created by the query wizard. And you can do the same by just dragging and dropping and selecting the field that you need. And it's a very useful tool when you have to write these long queries and you don't want to, and you don't have the time or you don't want to spend the time writing this. So you can just take the fields that you need, drag and drop, and work with your query. Now, before continuing, let's just check in our query console if this change that we have made will bring us the data that we need. Again, we just paste the change that we have made, and let's execute the console. Okay. And now we can see the date already reflects the date that is shown in our document. So let's check by saving the configuration and restarting our info base or application if the changes have been made. We go once again to the cash management and payments. Now remember, let's look to the flow report, and the issue is still here. Why? Because we have changed the posting procedure, but we have to understand that this document has been already been posted. So if we don't post it again, the changes will remain. So let's just post it again. And again, we have the breakpoint. So let's just continue to execution. To continue to execution, we go to this continue debugging button, or we just press F5, and we see that the app is back to work. And let's see the flow report. And now we can see that the accumulation register now show the correct date that we need to register in this document. It's showing the date that is supposed to show. And now we have finished changing our posting procedure, understanding that the problem was not with the register, but with the data that we were sending to the register. So here we just prepare all this data. We copy the data from the document and we send it to be copied to these registers. And then finally, we have the control part of the posting procedure. Here we can see control negative balance and cash received. This is also a step that is performed in the posting procedure that will check if everything is okay. If let's just say, in this case, it will check if we have enough money to make the payment in our balance register. So we can see that this resides in the document paying expenses run control. This means it's on the manager module. And let's just search for the run control procedure. And here we have. And once again, we can see, or just taking a look at this procedure, we're working with a query. So if we have to understand this, these controls are made on a basic principle, so they don't change a lot. But can be the case that maybe the data that we are comparing to is not proper data, or is confused with other data. So as we did in the initialization part, in the initialization data part of the posting procedure, the data that we gather from this query is the data that we are writing to the register. In this case, when we run in control, after we have written all the data to the register, as well will be controlled by the results of this query. So if we were to find a problem in the control section of the posting procedure, we have to check this query and the result of this query to see if the data that we are comparing to see if everything is okay is correct, then we can proceed to change if it's not correct. So the main point is that we have to understand which data we are taking on. And generally, we take data from the registers and documents with queries. So we have to pay very good attention to this query using the tools that we have to can understand what is going on. So we have the query wizard, we have the query console, so these are tools that will help us work with these queries in a more fast way, in a more easy way for us to understand what's going on. One other thing before finishing this webinar, we have to take a note about how to find bugs or defects in these documents, and doesn't mean that you have to find a bug or a defect in the code. You don't have to go and open all the code in the configuration and just try to read the code, try to read the queries to find the problem. The first step you have to do is enter the application and start using it as a client will do. So you have to use a business case. This means what steps you need to do to complete a document registration or a business transaction, and try to reply those steps in the OneC application and see the results. If the results differ, then you can go into the code. So when you have these problems, don't go straight to the code. First, start analyzing the problem from the application perspective and see the results of these steps, what gives you. Once you understand what is not working properly, you can now look more detailedly in the code. As well, when you are reporting defects to the support team, you should do this as well. Open the application, follow the steps, and see what is working and what's not working. And then when you fill in those steps, you will see in which step is things are going wrong, and then you can check the code. As well, you can write to us, to the support channel, saying, we have found this doesn't work the way it is intended. We're using this document, following these steps, and maybe if you are able to find the problem in the code, you can also write, but following these steps, okay? So let's go back to our presentation. And we have to summarize what we have learned in this webinar. So we have seen how to work with documents, how to fill the data with documents, how to analyze the result of a posting procedure in a document, not even opening the designer using the flow report tool. We also have seen how to do a business case analysis. This means following the steps of any transaction or any procedure that we're doing in the application, in the OneC Drive application, and as well watching the result of these steps. As well, we have seen some debugging tools that we have used to get to the end of this problem. You have to remember how to work with the designer. It's very developer friendly. We have learned about breaking points, how to check the code, how to use the query wizard, and as well how to use the query console. The query console you can download from the download sections in your My OneCI account, is free for all developers to use. And we have learned about the posting procedure structure. We have to remember three main parts of the processing process. That is initializing data, I mean, preparing data to copy to the registers. The second step will be copying or writing this data to the register. And the last step will be running a control procedure of this data that we have written to a register. And that's it for today's webinar. Thank you very much for your attention.